I knew something was off the second I stepped into Quinn's office. The room smelled like new furniture and insecurity. He didn't even glance up, just waved a hand like I was a janitor late for trash pickup. "Effective immediately," he said, voice flat, still scrolling through God knows what on his monitor. Then came the paperwork. Termination letter already signed, time-stamped 9:01 a.m. "We're centralizing control. Hand over the master credentials." I stared at that sheet of paper like it was a joke someone forgot to finish. 19 years. That's how long I'd been holding Weldon Prime together. Duct tape and dignity, one HVAC override and fire code loophole at a time. I wasn't just some IT lackey they found on LinkedIn. I built the system. I was the system. And now I was being deleted like a broken macro. No warning, no farewell, no coffee even. Before we go any further, if you're even remotely hooked by what I'm about to tell you, take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and like the video. 97% of people who listen never subscribe, but it really helps the team keep bringing you stories like this one. Okay, back to Quinn's little power trip. I gave him a look. Just one. Cool, steady, just enough to let him wonder if I'd spit in his coffee yesterday. Then I said it. "I'm afraid that won't be possible." I folded the paper neatly, placed it back on the desk, and walked out like I was headed to lunch. No scene, no tears, just a smile he'd remember. Outside, the hallway felt like stepping into another dimension. Clean floors, silent lights. Nobody knew yet. That's the thing about infrastructure. When you do your job right, you disappear. People forget the name of the person who kept the lights on through that March blackout, or who manually rerouted ventilation when the system glitched during last summer's heat wave. But they always remember the moment things stop working. I made it to the parking lot before the shaking started. Not from fear, just the adrenaline hitting me like a backdraft. I wasn't mad. Not yet. What I felt was something colder. Not betrayal either. Something surgical. They thought they were cutting out fat. They didn't realize they'd just unplugged the brain. My phone buzzed. HR had already revoked my badge clearance, no severance details, no exit interview, not even a "thank you for your service" email. Just like that, 19 years gone with the tap of a button. I sat in my car for a full 20 minutes, engine off, no music, just me staring through the windshield like it was a tombstone. And then, slowly, I smiled again. They didn't know. They had no idea what they'd just done. Because Quinn, Mr. High and Mighty from corporate, had no clue how the system actually worked. He thought the master controls were a password you could write on a sticky note. He had no idea that over the years, I'd built redundancy on redundancy, not to hoard power, but to protect the company from people exactly like him. External contractors had begged to get into our back-end infrastructure. I'd kept it all in-house, local, layered, logged, and now they had none of it. See, the centralized control he wanted, it didn't exist, not in the way he imagined. What existed were decentralized nodes, protocol-triggered subroutines, security layers hidden under unrelated maintenance shells, fail-safes with names like janitorial override 42, each one created for a specific failure scenario, and each one required someone who knew the map. There was no map, because I was the map. I drove home slowly, took the long way through the industrial park just to clear my head. Everything looked the same. I knew behind those walls were the same chilled pipes, the same badge readers, the same humming of controlled air, but now they were disconnected from the one person who knew what to do when something went wrong. And something would go wrong. That wasn't ego. That was inevitability. I got home, made coffee, decaf, because my heart was already doing the jitterbug, and opened my laptop. First thing I did, disable the internal sync on my work device. Next, I logged into my private archive, time-stamped logs, change records, access notes, architectural segmentation. And then I sat back. No panic, no rush. I'd made peace with the job ending months ago, if I'm honest. The writing had been on the wall ever since Quinn showed up with his lanyard full of buzzwords. But they had chosen to remove me wrong. And now they were going to learn what happens when you rip out a foundation thinking it was decoration. Not because I'd sabotaged them. I didn't need to. The systems were already doing exactly what they were supposed to do when custodial access was severed without protocol. They were protecting themselves. From everyone. The first time I realized no one else understood how the building actually functioned, I was standing knee-deep in an unfinished sub-basement, flashlight in my mouth, patching a thermal sensor with parts I'd bartered from a shut-down lab across town. That was 2006. They didn't even have digital schematics back then. Everything was still on paper, if it existed at all, and most of it was wrong. So I started over. Not officially, no budget, no committee approval, just necessity and pride. Because when you're the only one standing between a building full of people and a catastrophic shutdown, you don't wait for permission. You build it right. That's how it started. What followed was 19 years of obsession layered in concrete and copper. I didn't just install the systems, I designed them. Badge access? Sure, every exec thought their plastic square ruled the building, but behind every swipe, I'd built conditional logic trees. Certain panels responded only at certain hours. Some required thermal confirmation. Others triggered alert pings to devices only I carried. I created digital labyrinths where the walls could move. Because security isn't a product, it's a mindset. And mine was, if they were going to trust me with the guts of the place, I'd make damn sure no one could tear it apart with a single keystroke. Over time, I added more. Fire suppression logic that checked oxygen levels before releasing suppressant. Redundant HVAC routes so critical areas never dropped below thresholds, even if 4 nodes failed. Temperature buffers that cross-referenced server loads before allowing manual override. Hell, I once built a spoofed access script just to test if our contracted IT audit firm was paying attention. They weren't. Which is why I insisted Weldon Prime never outsourced infrastructure. Not a line of code, not a patch update, not even janitorial network access. Everything ran through me, not because I craved control, but because no one else gave a damn until something broke. And by then, they were always calling from a conference room full of executives sweating through their dress shirts, wondering why the AC had defaulted to 62 degrees. Now Quinn, Mr. Centralized Control, thought I'd hand over a master login like it was a Netflix password. What he didn't understand is that there was no single credential. There were layers, segmented zones, failover bridges, encrypted triggers that required physical presence, time-based sync, and one specific sequence of actions to even reveal the access shell. I never documented it in a single place. No diagrams, no flowcharts, not out of paranoia, out of principle. Because if someone could walk in with a binder and take over, then the system was already compromised. What I had built was deeper than access. It was custodial logic. You don't just get the keys to a fortress. You prove you belong inside. And Weldon's infrastructure knew who built it. It didn't recognize Quinn. And it never would. Funny part? Some of the protocols weren't even labeled with facility names. I used inside jokes, old project names. Even a few song lyrics embedded in triggers. To anyone else, it'd look like gibberish. To me, it was a language, one only I could speak. For years, people walked through Weldon Prime believing they were in control, that their card swipes and admin clearances meant something, that their title or bonus bracket gave them power over the building. It was adorable, because what they never understood is that the heartbeat of Weldon wasn't upstairs in the boardroom. It was humming below their feet, pulsing through conduits, cross-referencing behaviors, monitoring fluctuations. And I was the only one listening to it. Even when the building was quiet, I could tell you what was out of sync. A fan spinning too fast in sublevel B, a temperature drift in the northwest wing, the telltale sound of duct pressure shifting a second too late. That wasn't data. That was instinct. That was years of knowing the system like it was a living thing. And I made damn sure that if I ever walked away, voluntarily or otherwise, that living thing wouldn't just roll over for the next guy who knew how to operate a touchscreen. Quinn thought he was walking into a server room. What he didn't know was that he was stepping into a locked cathedral with no map, no priest, and no prayer of resurrection unless the system chose to trust him. And it wouldn't. Because I didn't build Weldon Prime to be convenient. I built it to survive. I didn't storm out, didn't raise my voice, didn't even close the office door with any extra force. Just walked back down the hallway like I was heading to refill my coffee, not being erased by a man who couldn't even be bothered to make eye contact. The badge reader blinked once when I passed through the side exit, still green. They hadn't pulled system access yet. Rookie mistake. When I got home, I didn't cry. Not even close. I've seen circuit boards fry, servers melt, and water lines burst in clean rooms. Nothing catches me off guard anymore. Not even betrayal served lukewarm by a man hiding behind a monitor. I set my bag on the kitchen table, poured myself a drink, not coffee this time, and powered up my work laptop. System still linked. Good. That meant my custodial sync hadn't been revoked yet. I opened the local encryption shell and ran the detachment sequence. Every node I had authority over, badge zones, thermal logic, HVSE interlocks, the full stack of physical ops, got its final sync record timestamped and archived. From that moment forward, the infrastructure would assume a custodial vacancy until it was formally reassigned through a verified onboarding sequence, which no one had done. Next, I opened the private drop I'd kept off-network for years. It wasn't even hosted under my name, just a chain of redundant storage logs, rotating encryption salts, and change journals going back over a decade. Each update was timestamped, each timestamp cross-verified against server pings from my admin credentials, and every action was locked behind a chain of multi-factor approvals that I had been the sole authority for. No drama, no speech. I just compiled a final message and sent it directly to Weldon Legal. As per Clause 7.4b of the Internal Custodial Policy, initiated 2018, revised 2022, all Tier 1 infrastructure access keys fall into deferred lockout pending reassignment through formal custodial onboarding. My departure has triggered this protocol. I am happy to assist in reconstructing access paths upon formal request and contractual agreement. No data has been deleted. Nothing has been modified. Custodial compliance preserved. Then I logged out, encrypted the archive again, and turned off the device. That was it. No threats. No heat. Just pure procedural order. You'd think, after almost 2 decades, I'd feel gutted, like something had been ripped from me, but I didn't. I felt still. Like I'd just filed the last form of a long, messy divorce. Because here's the thing about people like me. We don't chase chaos. We design around it. Every possible failure scenario had already been mapped out years ago. This was just another protocol running its course. That's what they never understood up in those glass offices. They thought everything could be fixed with a call to IT or some overpriced consultant flown in from Austin. But what I built? It wasn't some prefab stack with a support line and a 2-day SLA. What I built was woven into the bones of the facility, and every strand of it knew my cadence, my logic, my fingerprint. I'd never locked them out. The system did, exactly as designed. I leaned back in my chair, eyes tracing the grain of the wooden ceiling above me. It had been a long time since I had a day without alerts pinging my phone. No badge errors, no compressor drift warnings, no Sunday night urgent access calls from some mid-level manager who forgot their override sequence. It was quiet. Not the bad kind of quiet, the good kind. The kind that hums underneath your skin when you know every move was executed clean, precise, irreversible. By the time they realized what had happened, the fail-safes would already be active. Door schedules would default to weekend protocols. HVSE zones would resist override. Fire suppression logic would require multi-party validation and fail if improperly accessed. And every single one of those contingencies would trace back to one missing element: me. I didn't need to gloat. Didn't even need to check if they noticed yet. They would. Because this wasn't revenge. It was infrastructure. 3 days. That's how long it took for the cracks to show. I was in the middle of rinsing out a paintbrush, trying to finally tackle the guest room trim I'd ignored for 5 years, when my phone lit up with a number from corporate. Not Quinn. He was probably too proud or too clueless. No, this was someone further down the food chain. Assistant Director of Ops. Name was Brad, I think. One of those just trying to help types who always acted shocked when the system didn't magically bend to will. "Hey," he said, voice already strained, like he'd tried 5 things before calling me. "We can't get into Zone 6. The doors are stuck in weekend protocol. No one can badge in or out, and maintenance is locked out of the control panel. Can you—" I didn't answer right away. Just let the silence wrap around the line like fog rolling in. Finally, I said, "I'm no longer with Weldon." A pause, then some nervous rustling. Yeah, I know, but the protocol's stuck, and we've got people trying to prep that wing for the regional VP visit. It's just the override's not responding. That protocol, I said slowly, is under custodial lock. You'll need to go through legal. Click. Not a rude hang-up, just the sound of someone realizing they were officially out of their depth. I went back to the trim. Sky gray, 2 coats. The silence in my house was louder than usual, not oppressive, just loaded, like the quiet hum right before a machine restarts itself. About an hour later, I got the text. Attempted override from HQ triggered lockdown mode 3. Fire panel defaulted. HVAC restart initiated. All non-critical systems offline. The message came from a diagnostic ping I'd set years ago, a buried script buried beneath the secondary power grid, designed to notify me only when the system entered cascading defense. It wasn't sabotage, it was resilience. Here's what probably happened. Someone from corporate IT, thinking they were clever, tried to brute force Zone 6 with admin credentials, not understanding that the system had been taught to distrust new root access without sequential physical validation. In response, the system triggered what I'd built, a level 3 lockdown failsafe. Fire panels disengaged their override shell. HVAC systems dropped to emergency restart, routing airflow back to default zones to prevent system overheating. Lights dimmed. Elevator priority flipped. Even the badge readers began cycling emergency diagnostics, waiting for a credential sequence that no longer existed. All of it automatic. All of it logged. No damage, no foul play, just one glaring reminder that Weldon's infrastructure didn't trust strangers. And at that moment, everyone was a stranger. They had no idea how many systems ran through my access layer. It wasn't just security. It was behavior-based HVAC efficiency. It was staggered lighting protocols to shave energy costs. It was badge reader feedback loops that measured occupancy flow in real time. It was the quiet rhythm of a building that had been taught how to breathe. And now, it was choking on its own command chain. I didn't gloat. Didn't send a smug message, didn't even open the work laptop. I just sat on the floor of the guest room, still holding the paintbrush, staring at the wall, imagining some poor facilities tech banging their badge on a locked door, wondering why the system kept flashing, weekend hold active, even though it was Thursday afternoon. The irony was beautiful in its simplicity. They had fired the person the system still trusted. And now, it didn't trust anyone. It came in the form of a politely panicked email. Subject line, access clarification, facilities system restoration. No caps lock, no exclamation points. Just enough professional restraint to suggest someone had spent 20 minutes rewriting it to sound calm while their office slowly turned into a meat locker. It was from legal. Not Quinn, not Brad. This was from someone 2 floors higher, director of compliance, I think. Her tone was careful, but not unfriendly. Just confused, like someone staring at a locked safe that suddenly grew teeth. Ms. Hale, it began. Funny how I got my last name back the moment things got serious. We are seeking your assistance in establishing a restoration pathway for facilities control systems, which appear to be partially disabled following your departure. Could you please provide a written outline or documentation of the necessary procedures to reinstate master-level access credentials? I stared at it for a while. Not out of malice, just quiet vindication. They weren't threatening me. They weren't accusing me of wrongdoing. They were doing the only thing they could, crawling back through the one open door they hadn't thought to lock. So I wrote back, carefully attaching the policy they had all signed 5 years ago and probably never read since. Custodial Access Protocol, v3.2 internal, binding, reviewed annually by compliance, but never once questioned until now. My reply was simple. As per Custodial Access, Clause 4.1a, restoration of Tier 1 systems requires completion of a certified onboarding sequence. This includes 1. Documented key requests submitted to the system's custodian on file, now vacant. 2. A technical succession audit signed by both outgoing and incoming access holders. And 3. Compliance clearance confirming no policy breach during transfer. None of these steps occurred. As a result, the custodial chain is void. Restoration can proceed upon fulfillment of Clause E 4.2c, which allows for reassignment via a third-party consultant approved by both legal and compliance. In plain English, they hadn't just fired me. They'd fired the only person authorized to hand over the keys, and by doing so without protocol, they'd voided the entire administrative tree that the building relied on for safety, access, compliance, hell, even climate control. They hadn't fired an employee, they'd surgically removed a critical organ, then stared at the empty cavity like it owed them an apology. They responded within the hour. Legal said they were reviewing the documentation and would coordinate with facilities leadership to initiate restoration. I didn't hold my breath. See, what they didn't realize yet was that the damage wasn't in the system. It was around it. Fire codes required that emergency ventilation logic default to weekend schedule unless properly overridden. But the override shell, that had been hardwired to respond only to a validated custodial badge, mine. Without it, the building couldn't pass a single fire inspection. They could try to force access, rebuild panels, fly in vendors. But even the vendors would hit the same wall. No access tree, no documentation. Because the documentation wasn't written like a manual, it was embedded into the sequence itself, into the rhythm of access approvals, gatekeepers, fallback accounts, each layer depending on the presence of a prior one, like a spine with every vertebra numbered and nested. Without succession, there was no spine. And rebuilding it? That wasn't a project. That was an audit. Every corridor, every badge panel, every HVAC logic gate had to be manually verified, reprogrammed, revalidated by someone who understood the logic beneath it. And they didn't have that person anymore. Restoration would take weeks, and the building couldn't wait that long. Winter wasn't going to pause just because Quinn had skipped a meeting. Pipes didn't care about leadership titles. And code violations? They had deadlines. I made myself tea and stepped out onto the porch, watching my neighbor chip ice off his windshield with a spatula. The air was sharp, clean, still. Somewhere across town, a group of panicked executives was probably drawing up org charts and wondering which junior IT analyst they could sacrifice next to the system gods. Meanwhile, I sat wrapped in a fleece blanket, sipping chamomile, knowing they weren't dealing with sabotage. They were just dealing with procedure, the kind written in fine print, signed with a shrug, and ignored until the building started screaming. The cold came in like a thief, sharp, silent, merciless. That week in January, temperatures dropped 15 degrees below seasonal norms, and Weldon Prime, my old second home, sat right in the center of the descending freeze. A freeze warning had gone out across the entire metro area. Power grids were strained. City officials were sending advisories, and inside those glass-paneled walls, Quinn's team was trying to pretend they were in control. They weren't. The first alert triggered at 4:17 a.m., something about thermal inconsistencies in Sector Delta. Their team ignored it. Just a calibration issue, they assumed. Besides, they'd been trying to force the system into manual override for the past 4 days, hoping brute repetition would trick the infrastructure into compliance. It didn't. What they didn't know, what Quinn never bothered to ask, was that the thermal systems weren't controlled by one central shell. I designed them with zone-redundant logic, which meant every boiler had its own segmented trigger tree, each embedded in local controllers, layered in sequence, authenticated against ambient pressure shifts and time-gated key signatures. No single person could change the settings without passing the full custodial handshake, now void, thanks to Quinn's termination stunt. By 10 a.m., the East Wing was showing signs of failure. By noon, water started dripping through the ceiling tiles in finance. By 2 p.m., 4 wings were under full structural distress. Pipes burst from pressure spikes, walls soaked from rupture points that hadn't been accessed in years. The automatic emergency response had tried to initiate climate mitigation, but without a validated custodian, the system throttled back, interpreting the input as an unauthorized override. It wasn't malfunctioning. It was following orders. The damage report by 4 p.m. was staggering. 4 zones compromise, electrical hazards, severed network cables in soaked infrastructure closets, offices turned into indoor ice sculptures, preliminary loss projection, $3.4 million, and counting. That's when the CFO finally stepped in. I wasn't there, obviously, but I heard about the meeting through back channels. Old friends who knew I'd want to know and knew better than to sugarcoat it. It was in the executive conference room, the only part of the building still fully functional thanks to being on a legacy node I'd wired directly into its own backup HVAC years ago. Funny how that works. Apparently, the CFO walked in, took one look at the chaos diagram on the screen, and asked, calm as a judge, who architected this system? Silence. Then, Alec Hale. He nodded once. Who approved her dismissal? Another pause. You did. I imagine there wasn't much conversation after that. Just the sound of chairs shifting, someone clearing their throat, and Quinn trying to look anywhere but at the screen. It wasn't personal. That's what kills me. It wasn't vengeance, wasn't sabotage, wasn't me hacking the system from a dark basement somewhere. It was exactly what I'd told them would happen if custodial transfer wasn't properly executed. I didn't build Weldon to need me. I built it to need someone who understood it. And now, they had no one. The emergency contractors they brought in tried to trace the access chain and rebuild it from scratch. They couldn't. The architecture didn't follow standard modular design. It was adaptive, relational, triggered by internal logic, not external scheduling. You couldn't just swap in a generic controller and pray. You had to know the system. You had to have earned its trust. That was the word a technician used in the contractor's log. The system behaves like it doesn't trust us. I laughed when I read that. Not because it was funny, because it was true. Weldon Prime didn't trust them. It was defending itself the way I designed it to. No malice, no revenge, just obedience. Cold, mechanical, perfect obedience to the rules it was given. And the rule was simple. No validated custodian, no critical overrides. The damage wasn't just financial. It was reputational. Partners were spooked. Clients with sensitive server hosting had to be temporarily relocated. Internal teams were working from home. And facilities was a ghost crew, half of them reassigned, the other half quietly updating resumes. They fired me like I was a redundancy. Now they were learning the hard way that I was the continuity they never accounted for. It came from someone new this time. Not legal, not facilities, not Quinn, thank God. This one had a different tone. Conciliatory, professional, but with that soft tremor people get when they realize the fire they're calling about started in a room they swore would never burn. The subject line just read, consulting proposal, immediate response requested. The message was short. They'd like to engage my services for a limited retainer, 90 days renewable, beginning immediately, to support critical access, restoration, and system documentation for Weldon Prime infrastructure, standard rates, NDA included, full remote autonomy, no apology, no acknowledgement of how we got here. Just a hand extended, dripping with urgency, hoping I'd overlook the blood on it. I didn't respond right away. Not out of pettiness, I just needed a minute to ask myself what it would cost me. Not in hours or energy, but in principle, to walk back into the digital echo of a building that treated my life's work like disposable software. But here's the thing. I didn't want to go back. Not as staff. Not even as a named consultant. I had built that infrastructure to last beyond me, and now it had. They just hadn't liked the way it reminded them, so I offered them something else, a single condition. I wrote, I appreciate the offer. I do not wish to return as a retained consultant. However, I am willing to fully reconstruct the access architecture and return Weldon Prime to full operational status, on the condition that I am granted full intellectual property reversion of all infrastructure code, logic maps, and embedded protocols I built during my tenure. Pause there. That meant every line of code I'd written, every override sequence, every diagnostic script, every infrastructure shell, everything I'd handcrafted over 19 years would be mine, not theirs. Mine. If they wanted the building functional again, they would have to license it from me. I didn't expect them to say yes, but they did. They signed the agreement the next morning. No revisions, no red lines, just a single addendum about indemnification, which I had already anticipated and included a clause for. Once the ink was dry, I started the reconstruction. It took 2 days. 2. Not because I was fast, though I am, but because I knew the system. I didn't need blueprints, didn't need to retrace anything. I knew exactly where every lock sat, what protocol governed which zone, which timer script would stall if triggered out of order. I restructured the access tree node by node, zone by zone, rekeying credentials into a new chain that no longer relied on obsolete approvals or defunct badge hashes. Each segment was timestamped, documented, and bundled into a handover shell with clear logging instructions. I even included annotations this time, something I never did before. Not because I wanted to be generous, but because I wanted them to see what it took, what they'd ignored. What they'd tried to rip out like old carpet without understanding it was the damn foundation. On the third morning, I sent one final file, the full operational return certificate, digitally signed and verified. Weldon Prime was back online. The response from compliance was almost grateful. Almost. From Quinn, nothing. Not a word. Which suited me just fine. He wasn't the story anymore. He was a footnote in a building that now belonged, legally and practically, to the person who had built its spine. I didn't hang a plaque, didn't post about it, didn't brag. Because this wasn't about victory. It was about precision, about seeing a job done right, even if I wasn't there to punch in. Somewhere in the building, HVAC clicked back into cycle. Lighting logic resumed its staggered dimming. Door schedules realigned to active occupancy data. The place came alive again, not because they'd fixed it, but because they finally admitted they couldn't. The symposium was held in one of those convention centers that tries too hard to feel important. Gleaming surfaces, overpriced coffee, lanyards that dig into your neck, and booths with buzzwords stacked higher than the actual product specs. I didn't expect to go, let alone speak, but the invitation came from an old colleague who knew the story behind the headlines and figured it was time someone addressed the elephant in the boiler room. The panel was titled Legacy Architecture in Modern Buildings. The irony didn't miss me. I was the legacy, standing there in front of a room full of people who had spent their careers pretending custom infrastructure was a problem to be migrated, not preserved. I walked on stage, clicked through my slides, and told the truth. Not the corporate version, not the sanitized press release, just the real version of how a building, my building, was designed to think, to resist chaos, to survive its architects. How a system without memory is a system destined to repeat failure. How protocol isn't about rigidity, it's about continuity. No gossip, no names, just systems, logic, and the consequences of forgetting what you've inherited. They listened. Some leaned forward. A few took furious notes. One guy in the back asked if I'd be open to consulting on an academic retrofit project in Denver. I gave him my card. That's when I saw him. Quinn. Standing off to the right of the Weldon Prime Facilities booth like he'd wandered in by accident and stayed out of obligation. He wasn't wearing the badge of a speaker, just a generic exhibitor lanyard. No company rep beside him, no real crowd at his booth, just a looping slideshow running behind him and a stack of pamphlets no one was picking up. He didn't say anything, didn't wave, didn't even nod. But he watched. He watched as 3 university directors, one from Georgia Tech, another from Purdue, and one I recognized from the Cal State system, lined up after my talk. Not to ask questions, not to debate, just to hand me their cards. No pitch, no small talk. Just, if you're ever taking on new projects, we'd love to talk. I pocketed them, smiled, and thanked them one by one. Behind me, the screen still showed my final slide, a simple line diagram of Weldon's original HVAC core overlaid with the words, "Trust isn't built into code. It's earned by the people who write it." I didn't look back at Quinn, didn't need to. The silence between us was louder than any confrontation could have been. He knew, and judging by the way he shifted his weight, eyes fixed on anything but me, he'd known for weeks. Reputation doesn't return with an apology. It comes back in rooms like that where your work speaks before you do, and stays long after you're done talking. I left before the closing remarks. Didn't need the catered lunch. Didn't want the plaque. The real reward was knowing that somewhere in a cold room with a busted fire panel and a half-functional badge reader, someone finally realized the building didn't fall apart because it was old. It fell apart because it was orphaned, and I was never coming back to babysit. It was a cold Thursday morning when the message came through. Subject line. Figured you'd appreciate this. No preamble, just a screenshot. An online job board listing, the kind middle management types flock to when the floor finally drops out beneath the false confidence. There he was. Quinn. Former facilities director, it read, specializing in centralized systems, enterprise-level infrastructure realignment, and remote operations oversight, seeking consulting roles. Available immediately. Immediately. Of course it said that. Like the word itself hadn't already become a punchline. I stared at the listing for a long time, not in triumph, not in pity, just in confirmation. It was the kind of quiet punctuation life hands you when you've already moved on, already healed, already reestablished your worth in rooms 10 times more important than the one that shoved you out without a second thought. I didn't screenshot it, didn't forward it to gossip, just copied the link and sent it to one person, the Weldon CFO. No message, no commentary, just the link. He replied within 5 minutes. Immediate effectiveness has consequences. That was it. No emoji, no signature, just the most honest sentence to come out of that building since they removed my name from the systems log. I didn't smile right away, not out of restraint, but because the satisfaction didn't come from watching Quinn squirm. It came from knowing the system never bent for him. It had waited, silent and still, until the only person it trusted returned. Not with a grudge, but with documentation, structure, and clarity. They had wanted control immediately. They had wanted compliance, submission, instant turnover. They got none of it. And when the dust settled, after the pipes burst, after the zones froze, after the reputations cracked, they realized something that had always been true. Infrastructure remembers who respected it. They lost their grip the second they treated legacy as liability. And I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to hack anything. I didn't need to retaliate. All I did was walk away. And in doing so, I took the one thing they never understood was mine to begin with. Continuity, not just of systems, but of trust, design, care, long game thinking, the kind that doesn't show up on org charts or budget sheets. They fired me to gain control, but control isn't something you seize. It's something you earn, line by line, in code no AI can replicate, in decisions no shortcut can replace. And once they threw that away, they lost it, permanently.